All right, we go back to Kade now. I believe you set up. You set up, Kade?
Yep, I'm pretty much good to go.
Uh,
I can do a small bowl here and we can go through a few of the Ellsworth cuts.
that'd be great.
I was going to do this one, but we wouldn't get that many cuts before I sort of started flexing on me and possibly make a funnel. So I put on a more solid piece of wood, so we'll get a few more shavings, a few more cuts, and you can see the different cuts and presentation.
Come on, Kade, where's your sense of adventure?
Yeah.
Right? I don't want to be part of the Band-Aid brigade.
I don't blame you.
Ooh.
Touche.
Kate, is that redwood on one side?
This is a piece of cherry. This is just the
Looks like
end
it's
of the
redwood
rough cut.
there.
That's just the end of the rough cut lumber. So this piece is, I don't know, it doesn't really matter dimensions, but 4.5 by 4.5 square, 2 inches thick. But the Ellsworth Grind gouge, or also referred to as the Irish Grind bull gouge, are very similar. They were sort of both developing the tool at the same time. So it depends who you talk to which name is sort of used. But this is the Ellsworth Grind gouge. The nose of the tool on a traditional Ellsworth Grind gouge is 55 degrees, swept back to 120 degrees. Now, different wood turners have different preferences, or usually have a few different. There's still the Irish grind or the Ellsworth Grind gouge because of the way it's ground to have this wing and this swept back flat portion. But wood turners modify the angle of the nose between 45 to 65, 70 degrees, depending on the pitch or the steepness of the bowls that they generally turn. So these two are a 55 and a 60 degree bevel angle, both swept back to 120 degrees. Now, when you first get an Ellsworth, it's going to have a sharp edge here when you grind it. So what I do is I sort of make a micro bevel to relieve that edge, because as we come around that corner, that sharp corner will actually score that wood, leaving tool marks behind. And you'll be like, man, I'm riding the bevel, I'm presenting the tool correctly, I'm cutting with the proper portion of the tool. Why am I still getting tool marks? It's actually that sharp edge that is left at the back when you only grind the one bevel. So I do a secondary micro bevel to relieve that sharp corner. So as I come up and around that corner, I don't have added tool marks to sand out, okay? And they come in all kinds of different sizes, 1/4 inch up to, the biggest one I have is a 3/4 inch Thompson. And I use that sort of when I'm doing massive bowls and you get like an inch shaving off the bowl. But my go-to is usually the 5/8, or on smaller items, I like using the 3/8 bowl gouge. Now, if you're in the UK or Canada, 3/8 refers to the flute. If you're in the States, this would be a 1/2 inch because it refers to the size of the drill stock, okay? So let's make some cuts. I have my chuck in here. I have my spur drive and my tail stock up for support. I've already removed the corners, so I don't need to worry about that, but it's good practice to have muscle memory and just turn that piece of wood to make sure nothing's going to hit the tool rest and come flying off. So when we use the Irish grind or the Ellsworth grind bowl gouge, we use it at center. And we are cutting with that bottom wing at that center line. So in North America, we're taught to keep this tool flat on your tool rest and parallel, perpendicular to your tool rest, but parallel with the height of your lathe bed. In the UK, they use their tool rest slightly lower and they angle that tool up, still cutting with the bottom wing riding the bevel, okay? Still the same application, just a different tool height. I've taken classes and taught in both parts of the world, so I do a happy medium with a slight angle upwards, okay? Now there's a few different cuts. When I refer to the flute, this is the flute. So if you have an open flute, your flute's facing directly up. If your flute is closed, it's perpendicular to your bedway. A roughing cut and a finishing cut, I tend to do at a 45-degree angle in the direction I am cutting. Let me just double check my battery here. Yep, I'm at 24%, so I'm gonna plug this in so it doesn't die on me halfway through. Okay. Whoa. All right, so first off, we will do, there's two different ways you can use this. You can pull the tool towards you, which is a pull cut. You can also stand back by your tailstock and you can do a push cut, holding the tool in your right hand and pushing towards the tailstock. Now a push cut or a pull cut, I find that really depends on the preference of the turner. I prefer a pull cut, but also with a pull cut, depending how you shape and deflect that flute, all the shavings are collecting in my elbow and sort of off my left pec. With a push cut, you're that much further out of the way of those deflecting wood chips. So you don't get as dirty and they're not flying up in your face. But I would always wear a respirator, right? When we're turning in a confined area. So turning in a pull cut doesn't really matter for me because I wear a respirator shooting those shavings at myself. So first off, I will do a roughing cut. For my flute, actually, I'm just going to change to my bigger bowl or my bigger tool rest here. Maybe a little overboard, but I can get up and around that corner easily and supported well. Now I set up my tool rest at a 45 so I can start here and I can come up and around out the rim and I'm always supported by my tool rest. I don't have to move it more than once. Can you still hear me talking with the lathe on?
Yes, sir. It's fine.
Alrighty. So I roughing cut, your flute's facing in the direction you're cutting. You enter and initiate that cut with that bottom wing. You're automatically riding that bevel. Slow down as I exit that rim because we don't want that to break off and have slivers flying through the air. Now that is a roughing cut if I really hog that wood away. If I take a 1/16 of an inch of a cut, that same cut now becomes a finishing cut. Okay.
Look at the change in shavings.
My handle, I can present this wing. I ride the bevel on this surface and I would create a peeling cut. So now I am cutting above center. I have the tool handle low I'm riding the bevel on that wing, and I pull the tool towards me, removing a lot of material quickly with a peeling cut. But make sure when you use a peeling cut, you stay on that bevel. We don't want to lift this up and drop that, exposing that wing and then catch. Okay. This is jumping around. I'm not sure my spur drive is in place properly.
Oh, it looks like you're copying Brenda's work.
That's what I was thinking too, Betty. Looks like a little flower pot.
And I'll do it.
Brenda, you trained him well.
Yes.
There we are.
And I don't see
I
any
wish that were
Band-Aids.
true, guys.
I'll use this. I originally made this piece for making donuts. So I drilled that hole in here. So actually I'm gonna stick it back in this chuck, expand it, and it will be our bowl. I thought I could get away with the spur drive in that chuck, but it's just moving on me with the vibration.
Hey, Brenda, that Mike says it's not a flower pot, it's a wooden fez.
It could be. So at this angle on this pass, when I ride the bevel and pick up that cut at that speed bump, I will get rid of these square edges. So now I have the maximum diameter here. Now I can start shaping the curve of my bowl. A little bit of out of balance, but it'll be back in balance in no time. So there's the finishing cut. I pick up that cut here where I left off and proceed through my rim. I took that in 2 cuts just because if I took it in 1, it would have tore out and I might have had a sliver coming through the air here on my side grain. Now I can think about shaping my bowl. So I want to flatten this to get a nice tenon. Now you can do that 2 ways. So we did a roughing cut, a finishing cut, drop the handle down here, we do a peeling cut. We can also use these flat sides for a scraping cut to clean up this surface. You just want to maintain your flute closed and you proceed towards the live center and back towards the rim. Now you can go in one direction or the other, or you can go back and forth depending on your comfort. The main thing is when we are doing this scraping action, you want that flute to be closed so we could fit maybe 1 or 2 business cards in between this top blade. You don't want to contact both because it'll just burn and dull your tool. Now we don't want to open this too much either because now we expose that bottom wing and that will be a catch, okay? So you want to make sure you keep that closed when scraping with that flat side. Now we can rough define our tenon. So I enter at a 45, close the flute to get that right angle. And I can scrape outwards with my flute closed, okay? That's my tenon. Now I can shape the bottom, or I could create a foot. I like to have a foot because it's sort of a pedestal for the bowl to sit on. So I do the exact same cuts, roughing cut, approach a wall, close the flute, so I don't get a catch with that bottom wing. Okay, now I have my tenon and my foot defined. Now my tenon is a 2-inch tenon because I'm using a 1-way number 2 jaws today. So we'll just eyeball this, and I'm at 2 inches and a 1/16. That'll do, because the perfect circle with a 1-way number 2 jaws is anywhere between 1 7/8 and 2 1/8. So that'll do. Now I just need to refine that to make sure it's a straight right angle, because I'm using straight right angle jaws. There's no benefit to using dovetail jaws with a straight serrated type chuck. Now I can straighten that up with my parting tool, or what I use is a modified 1/4 inch Ellsworth gouge. So I ground this so it's flat. I still have that 55-degree angle. I just removed those wings that would give me a catch. Now this gives me my perfect right angles and dovetails for my tenons and my feet. So my tenon is a perfect right angle cut into that shoulder that sits on the top of the chuck or on those chuck jaws. And then my foot is usually slightly dovetailed to give it that lift, okay? Now I need to just connect the dots, give this a little bit of curve and shape. So I can do that with a roughing cut, only for so long until that foot starts to get in the way. So at that point, I would switch back to my peeling cut. And I shape that bowl, close the flute to get that crisp corner. Now all I need to do is do a shearing cut or a finishing cut. Now I want to clean this up. So I have that nice crisp corner, 45 close as I approach that wall. Now when I'm closed, I raise this slightly above center, and I am scraping with that bottom wing on an angle similar to the angle presented by the skew. You see, you get those really nice fine angel hair past the primavera shaving that you get from the skew. So I have a finishable surface here now of a 1/2 inch, and I switch to my Ellsworth gouge again, and I shear scrape on this flat side, connecting all those dots and all those tool marks and giving me a really nice finish. Okay? Almost like peach fuzz. Okay? And that's what you want. And you want to cut downhill. So we cut from the base of this bowl to the rim, slowing down as we come through the rim. Now at this point, I would check my curve, make sure there's no little lumps and bumps, hills in there. You can see straight off the tool, I have a nice finish because I did slicing cuts. There was no scraping involved. At that angle, that tool, it is slicing across that on a skewed angle, giving me a really nice finish. So even
the
in the
joints.
rendering, I have a really nice finish. Now I could start sanding that at 220 and go to my desired sand. Now I'm going to switch this so I have roughing cuts, peeling cuts, fine shear scraping cuts. Now I flip this around and I do the inside, because you can do all these cuts on the inside as well. So you can make those cuts on a concave and a convex surface. So I'll just switch this around quickly and I can make those cuts.
For you just joining us, this is Kade Bolger. He's out of Ontario, Canada, and he's one of our regular members. He also does workshops from his shop, pay-per-views. And I tell you, they are fantastic. This is what you get. How to use the tool, how to accomplish the cut. And if you didn't notice, that piece has got chatoyance and he's not sanding on it. The cuts were that clean.
Now, when I put my chuck on, I always hold the chuck and I turn the back wheel. We don't want to be here going like this because it's heavy and awkward. You might actually strip the threads of your spindle. So I hold that in place and I turn the back wheel, snapping it into place. And I will save the threads on my headstock every time. One thing I forgot to mention, when we create a tenon, you want to create a tenon that is less than ½ an inch. Because the distance from the top of this jaw to the bottom of this jaw is ½ an inch. And if I have this bottomed out in the chuck, and I get a catch on this opposing corner, it gives it leverage to pop out of the chuck and become airborne. So you want to make your tenon 3/8 of an inch or less, so we have a little bit of an 1/8 of an inch gap in between the bottom and our tenon, which is like an airbag. It absorbs that shock and it's less likely to come off the lathe. It's not guaranteed, depending how heavy of a cut that is, but it's less likely to come off the lathe with that little airbag. I bring up my tailstock, tighten that so I have a good reference from this shoulder in contact with the top of that jaw, which references it to grip the tenon, and it's as balanced as it was between centers. Now I tighten my chuck. And I tighten all corners, and you see my hand never leaves the chuck key whenever it's in that chuck. You don't want to forget it. Get doing something, come back, forget that's there, because now you have an anti-tank round flying through the air. Not really, but it's a good analogy. A chunk of steel flying through the air.
Well, if you have to get hit, you only want to get hit one time. You'll never forget it.
Yep, that's true. Now I'm just going to get out my fancy depth gauge here, and I'm going to stick it in the center. I'm going to line up the corners this side to this side, because I pre-drilled that hole in there for the donut. So that's perfect. Even at the bottom of that Forstner bit hole, I'm 1/8 away from the top of my foot. So actually I have 1/4 inch before I go through the bottom of my foot, because I got to keep in mind I'm going to remove that tenon afterwards. And we don't want a funnel, we want a bowl. Okay. So again, I set up my tool rest just below center. So when I am using my tool, I am cutting across with that lower wing at center. Now with this, you could do that scraping cut where I set up my tool rest at a 45 to that corner, and I do that scraping cut with my flute closed, scraping with that bottom flat side. But keep in mind, scraping dulls your tools quicker. So when you can, you want to make cutting actions or slicing actions because it will severely reduce your sanding and the sharpness, longevity of your tool before you have to go back and forth to the grinder. So if I were to scrape, it would be in this fashion, dulling my tools. But if I wanted to do a cutting action, I line up my tool rest straight to the face of this bowl. I'm cutting at center, a little low. There we go. And I create a cutting action opposed to a scraping action. So I line up my bevel with this. I exit. I enter maybe a 1/16 of an inch. And I proceed to make that cut with that bottom wing. Once I enter into that wood, I'm riding that bevel. If you're riding the bevel, the tool stays where it needs to be. It's when you come off that bevel, okay, you get that beautiful catch. I fell off because I kept bringing my tool slightly this way, but that's okay. I can ride the bevel, pick up my cut, and proceed towards center. Now I want this to be flat because when I make my entry cut, if this is an uneven surface, it will shoot my tool in either direction, no matter how I present that flute. But in order to get a good entry cut, you want to make sure your flute is closed. You enter with the tip. Now the tool is not going to go anywhere. But if I try to make that action and I have my flute open, it's going to skate away in that direction. If I have my flute too closed, oh, it's going to skate away in the other direction. So you want to make sure your flute is perfectly closed, enter with the tip, then I rotate to the 45 and I proceed to make that cut with a bevel riding. See, I tried to enter with my flute in the same position, skated away on me. So I want to enter, open, proceed through with a bevel rubbing cut. That's a very nice cut, giving you a nice finish, but it's also supported and you'll get far less of a catch. Okay, I'm just going to clean this up again. This tool is slightly dull from my demo yesterday. So I'm going to switch to this one, which was my backup for yesterday, and it's still sharp. And I always make those cuts in the center first, just in case I get that skate away. I don't want to blow through that nice rim that I got that really nice finish off the tool. Okay. And I do a few of those just to get that muscle memory and work my way back to the rim, because every cut is a practice cut for that finishing cut. So enter, close, 45. Now I'm in a roughing cut for the inside of that bowl. Okay. Now before I remove too much of this material, depending on the wall thickness you desire. If you're going to go thin, you don't want to remove all that material, because when you start going thin, this will start flexing on you. So I'm going to make this maybe 3/8 of an inch wall thickness, but I want to leave that wood there for support so this doesn't flex on me. So now I enter, open my flute. I can leave that there because that's going to give me structure. Now when I enter, what you want to do is you line this bevel up with the outer edge of that bowl, and when you enter, the curve is going to match as I proceed through in that bevel rubbing cut. Close as I approach that wall. I pick up my bevel, ride the bevel, bring it back, proceed to make that cut with that bottom wing. And close the flute. Now let's take a peek of that wood grain. With those slicing cuts, you get a really nice finish off the tool. I could start sanding at 240 and go up to whatever desired finish. Now that's way too low. I can't use that. I'm gonna have to come back up to center. Now I can remove this material because I'm past where that material is supporting the flex. So I can proceed to do a series of these cuts, or I can flip the tool, ride the bevel, and I can cut directly into the tailstop. But in doing this cut, I can take a much heavier cut because all that pressure is forcing it into the chuck to stay where it needs to stay. If I take that heavy cut out here, all the force is out here, which can pop it out of that chuck, okay? So here, I can take that all in one, really. Okay. Now I pick up, ride my bevel. I'm actually gonna flip this around here so we can maybe see in the bottom of that bowl there. There we are. Not bad with the cell phone. Now I'm looking down this wall. I ride the bevel. I pick up that cut. I'm cutting with that bottom wing with a bevel rubbing cut, and I proceed towards center. I have consistent wall thickness here, probably about 1 inch in, so I can ride the bevel, pick up my cut, and blend. Oop, just a little too heavy of a cut there as I came into that wall. And that is at the depth of my bowl, because I don't want to make a funnel. Now I can raise this tool up slightly, come up and back down, which gives me a shearing cut, a finishing cut. Okay, just take that so I don't have an outie. Here we go. Slow down as we approach center. And those are all the different cuts of your Ellsworth gouge.
Comments, what turners?
Tenon, the bottom off the tenon, if people like. I have a little bit of a hill there.
I'm going to ask how, okay.
There we go.
Here's the math of wood turning. You can cut
Everyone's still there?
you can take the bump out. You can't put the divot back in.
Yeah, must have been the volume that came down here. Or it's my earplugs. I'm just gonna double
All right,
check. the
we still
volume.
got you.
Yeah, I hear you.
All right. Susan
Okay.
says she likes it and she's waiting for the rerun on our website.
All right. So yeah, the volume on my phone just turned down, so I couldn't hear you. But there, I'll take this out of the chuck and we can see. I have very little sanding to do with nice slicing cuts rather than scraping cuts.
That's beautiful.
Very nice demo. Very benefit. The piece looks beautiful as it is.
Good job, Kade.
Very nice piece.
Cade.
Oh, I do have one comment, Kade.
Great demo.
I noticed a couple of times you ran your finger down the flute to clean the shavings out of that gouge.
Yeah, I just flicked it with my nail, sort of.
Yeah, you want to be real careful doing stuff like that because I've had mine lay me open before. So
Yeah, that's true. You do want to make sure that
you don't want to be part of the Band-Aid brigade. Trust me.
Yeah. Remember, for those of us with real sharp tools, that's important.
So this is a jam chuck. I could take the tenon off if people want to see that.
Yeah.
All right. We got about a half an hour before we wrap this thing up. We'll see this. And if you've got a gallery, folks, put it in the chat. And we wrap this up. We'll go to the chat. Remember, we turn the button off at 9:00 p.m. Central Time.
So with
That
a
includes-
pressure, sorry, go ahead.
No, that includes where Doug Rowe is. We know what time zone he's in.
So when you use a pressure chuck, I want to shape this to the same curve of the inside of my bowl, and I will hold this up against this piece with my tailstock live center, and I will remove the tenon. Now you could go to a sander and you could sand this off, but we're not sanders. I'll show you how to turn that off. But if you did sand it off, you want to make sure you have equal position on either sides. Otherwise, you're going to have a bowl that sits like this. Okay. So it's a lot easier to get that flat bottom and that concave by turning it off. You could use a vacuum chuck or a vacuum system. I'm a little too frugal to buy one because you can do it many different ways without, but they are quite handy. I'm just going to remove this to give me shape. So the shape matches the curve of the bottom of my bowl. There we go. A little flatter on the nose. I can do that with a scraping action. Just like so. There we go. Now we got a match. Now I'd remove my tool rest. I would sand that little nub off. Always remove your tool rest when sanding, and never put your hand over top of your tool rest, because if it catches or articulates downwards, you can do some damage. So I hold it under my tool rest, supported, anchored to my tool rest for stability. Protect those hands, fingers, wrists. You only get one, no replacements. Now, as a cushion for this, I use router mat. Make sure to fold it corner to corner, corner to corner. You can also use a small piece of foam, which sits over top of this.
You was wondering where the router mat comes from. It's rubber shelf paper. It's at Home Depot and Lowe's, Rouse's, Winn-Dixie.
You can even get it at the dollar store.
Oh, Doug Rowe's gonna love that.
That's where I get it.
Where Doug got his pink bikini.
Right, because I use all those dollar bills I get when I'm dressed the way I dress. What?
Now, first thing I would do before I flip that, I would take my little fancy depth gauge and reassure how deep I had gone. So I line this edge up with this edge, mark it with my fingernail, and I know that I've gone into that bowl. Let's see, where's the camera? This deep. So I have about a 1/4 inch, so I can undercut this foot to make it concave, leaving me at an 1/8 of an inch base. I'm pretty sure I did that already. I just wanted to reassure.
Well, you're just promoting that depth gauge. We're gonna be able to sell a box of 10 for like $20 or so.
Right? Get them at the dollar store and mark them up 300%.
Yeah, where can we find that depth gauge?
I can sell you some.
Yeah.
Hey, be
I got
careful, guys. It's made out of real wood.
Now you want to use enough pressure that's not going to dent the bottom of your bowl, but it's still going to drive the bowl on the lathe. I set this up at a 45° to this corner. And I can use a few different tools. I can use my Irish grind or Ellsworth grind in that roughing cut, close it as I approach that foot. I can also do it with my modified Ellsworth in the same fashion. Or you could do a cut, practice cuts in this direction. But if I am too heavy-handed this direction and it's not quite tight enough here, it can wobble and you can get a catch. So by cutting this way into the chuck, all that pressure is into the chuck, into that pressure chuck, keeping it where it has to stay and not wobbling around on me. I double check with my hand behind my tool rest, make sure that is running true. Never put your fingers on this side, because if that wood catches your finger, it's going to jam like a football, a basketball, a volleyball, but it might pull your finger in between that wood and that metal. The wood will burn, the metal will cut. So I present flute at a 45 in the direction I'm cutting. This is a roughing cut. Close the flute. Slow down as we approach that live center. Now I want to make this angled inwards. I can come out in a scraping action. But my final pass is always with a bevel rubbing, slicing cut, because that will give me the best finish with the least amount of sanding. Here we go. Now I reduce this pin to a triangle, just like so, leaving it attached by a little pin. Now go as thin as you feel comfortable with. If that's as thin as you want to go, you can carve it off and sand it, okay? That would be the least amount of risk. Go as thin as you feel comfortable with. I go to about a 16, but I mean, I number my pieces, and I'm up to 20,626 in 12 years. Ride your bevel, pick up that cut. I switched to a detail spindle gouge, 30-degree bevel. Now this allows me to get that triangle, nice and sharp connections at the bottom of that point. Now also you want to have just the right amount of pressure There we go. Now I'm down to probably an 1/8. That's good enough for now.
Okay, how many of y'all are holding your breath waiting for that cut?
I have a little bit of a line there, so my final pass is actually going to be with my modified Ellsworth. There we go. Now at that point, I would sand the bottom. Yep. At that point, I would just lightly sand the bottom, and I could sand it at 240, start at 240, finish at 240. The rest of the bowl, I won't sand at all. And I would now take that off. A little bit of a tool mark there, but that's okay. It's a demo. Still pretty good with no sanding. A little bit of a tool mark there. I could have took more time sanding it, but as I'm getting thinner here, with my pressure chuck, this will flex and move. So that's why I have a little bit of a scallop here and not over here. So just like my wall thickness is 3/8 of an inch, I'm down to about 1/8 of an inch at the bottom. I would take that and break that across the grain so it breaks above the surface. You don't want to break it with the end grain because depending on that end grain, that curl, that swirl, you might sever below the surface. I would take my antique gouge. I would carve across the grain just to blend that. And then I would hand sand it. You can also, depending on your comfort level, you can actually part through that little knob. And if you have the perfect amount of pressure, it will break free, but that little nib will actually keep this and hold it on the lathe if you do it correctly. But it's not easy to do, so I definitely don't recommend trying that. And then I just sand across the grain to blend that. And then after that, I sand with the grain to hide any scratches within that grain. I would take a little more time sanding, but for the purpose of the demo and learning the several cuts that you can make with the Irish or the Ellsworth Grind bowl gouge, it actually replaces your full arsenal of scrapers.
I'm gonna be
Very
the first
good.
one to jump on board and say, wow.
Great demo, Kate.
Excellent. Excellent.
Very nice.
Thanks,
Absolutely
everyone.
beautiful.
Okay,
Kade.
if you tuned in late, this will be on our website.
Excellent demo, Kate.
Love the explanation of how and why you were doing different things. That helps.
It's how the tool works and how it cuts. And he showed you that all the way through.
Big Kate as usual.
Great demo, Kate. Thank you.
Yeah, great.